Today, we are examining a significant 1999 paper by Hoskisson and his colleagues titled Theory and Research in Strategic Management, Swings of a Pendulum. What this paper does is provide a historical analysis of the strategic management field, tracing its evolution in terms of both its core theoretical focus and its research methodologies. So here's our roadmap for this analysis. First, we'll establish the scholarly conversation the authors were entering. Then, we'll look at their central organizing idea, the pendulum metaphor. From there, we'll trace the pendulum's swings through the field's major theoretical shifts, focusing in on the resource-based view. And finally, we'll summarize the paper's primary contribution and review the future research directions the authors proposed. Okay, so to understand this paper, we first have to understand the context in which it was written. The authors observed that strategic management had evolved from its practical, case-based origins into a much more theoretically diverse field. They identified a key tension: the rise of the resource-based view, a theory that refocused attention inward on the firm's unique characteristics, which, as it turns out, is precisely where the field began decades earlier. This observation led the authors to pose the central question that structures their entire argument. Has the field of strategic management come back to its roots, similar to the swing of a pendulum? You see, to answer this, they mapped out the dominant theories and research methods over time to see if this cyclical back-and-forth pattern was actually there.
And this brings us to the conceptual framework they use to organize their analysis. It's a metaphor of a pendulum. Just picture it. The weight of the pendulum represents the focus of strategy research. Over time, it swings back and forth between two poles. One side is an internal focus, looking at the firm itself, and the other is an external focus, looking at the industry and the competitive environment.
And here's what that trajectory looks like. In the 1960s, the focus was almost entirely internal, on identifying best practices inside firms. Then, in the 1970s, the pendulum swung hard to the outside, driven by industrial organization economics, which emphasized industry structure. But it didn't stop there. By the mid-70s, it began swinging back with organizational economics, which examined the boundary between the firm and its environment. Finally, in the 80s and 90s, the pendulum completed its swing, returning to a strong internal focus with a resource-based view. All right, let's deconstruct this line of argumentation. We're going to examine each of these major theoretical phases in chronological order to understand what was driving the pendulum at each point. So in the beginning, the field, which was then known as business policy, was focused squarely on the individual firm. Thinkers like Chandler and Ansoff were centered on this idea of distinctive competence, what makes a particular company unique. The guiding principle was that strategy should determine a firm's structure, not the other way around. The methodology followed from this. Because each firm was seen as unique, the primary research method was the inductive, single-company case study. Then came a major intellectual shift. The field imported the structure, conduct, performance paradigm, or SCP, from economics. And with this, the unit of analysis changed completely. The SCP paradigm argues that a firm's performance isn't primarily about its unique internal character, but is instead a function of the structure of the industry in which it operates. The focus moved from the firm to the industry. Now, this theoretical shift brought a profound methodological shift along with it. The field moved away from qualitative, single case studies and toward deductive, large-scale statistical analyses. Researchers adopted economic tools from economics, and the goal changed from understanding a single unique firm to discovering broad scientific generalizations that could apply across entire industries. But the pendulum began to swing back. This next movement was driven by a different branch of economics, known as organizational economics. If industrial organizational economics treated the firm as a black box within an industry, organizational economics sought to open that box. It shifted the focus away from the broad industry structure and zoomed in on the transactions and contracts that define the firm itself. Two key theories from this school of thought became particularly influential. The first, transaction cost economics, or TCE, asks a very fundamental question: why do firms even exist? Its answer lies in efficiency. It argues that firms emerge when it's less costly to organize an activity internally than to conduct that transaction on the open market. The second, agency theory, views the firm as a nexus of contracts and focuses on the inherent conflicts that can arise between principals, like shareholders, and their agents, like managers. This brings us to the culmination of the pendulum swing back toward an internal focus, with the rise of what became the dominant paradigm of the 1990s, the resource-based view, or RBV. So the resource-based view is all about this question you see on the screen. Its central premise is that firms are heterogeneous. They're different from one another because they possess unique bundles of resources and capabilities. And it's this heterogeneity, not just industry position, that allows firms to achieve and sustain a competitive advantage. So, according to the RBV, not all resources are created equal. For a resource to be a source of sustainable competitive advantage, it has to pass 4 tests, outlined in a well-known framework by Jay Barney. First, the resource must be valuable. It has to help the firm exploit an opportunity or neutralize a threat. Second, it must be rare. Third, it has to be difficult for competitors to imitate. And fourth, there can't be any strategically equivalent substitutes for that resource. Only when all 4 conditions are met can a resource provide a lasting advantage. All right, so after laying out this entire historical narrative, what is the paper's core theoretical contribution? How does it advance the scholarly conversation? The primary contribution is the pendulum swing metaphor itself. It serves as a framing device that provides a coherent narrative for the intellectual history of the field. It shows that these shifts weren't random. Instead, each new paradigm built upon or reacted against the one that came before it. This process, this series of swings, has progressively enriched the field's total body of knowledge. Now, the authors don't just look backward. They also use their analysis to propose a clear agenda for the future of strategic management research. Their proposed agenda from 1999 highlighted several key areas. They called for more research into how competitive advantage can be sustained in dynamic, high-velocity environments. They argued for the integration of different theories to tackle the complexities of globalization and the importance of institutional context in international strategy. They also suggested exploring alternative theories of management, integrating research across multiple levels of analysis, and continuing to combine both quantitative and qualitative methods. The paper concludes by leaving us with a question that remains highly relevant. Given the contemporary landscape of rapid technological change and what's often called hypercompetition, we're left to consider, where will the pendulum of strategic management theories swing next?